Welcome back to Psychological Depth. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the topic 5 most dangerous female habits that can ruin a man's life forever. His friends stopped recognizing him. Not physically. He looked the same, maybe a bit, more tired. The change was deeper. The confidence that used to define him had evaporated. The opinions he used to hold firmly now required permission before expressing. The decisions he used to make independently now needed approval he rarely received. The man they'd known for decades had been replaced by someone constantly anxious, perpetually apologizing, endlessly trying to satisfy requirements that kept escalating. The transformation took 3 years. Not sudden collapse. Gradual erosion. Small concessions that seemed reasonable at the time. Boundaries that softened because maintaining them produced conflict he lacked energy for. Self-respect that diminished incrementally. Each reduction feeling minor until the accumulation became catastrophic. She hadn't hit him, hadn't stolen from him, hadn't done anything that would appear in a police report. What she'd done was subtler and therefore more devastating. She'd installed patterns that rewired his psychology. Habits that seemed like quirks initially revealed themselves as systematic destruction only after the destruction was complete. This isn't rare. The mechanism operates constantly, invisibly in relationships everywhere. The habits that destroy men don't announce themselves. They present as normal relationship friction, as understandable reactions to stress, as things that will improve once circumstances change. By the time the pattern becomes undeniable, the man recognizing it has already lost years, resources, confidence, and sometimes everything else. Today, we're identifying the 5 most dangerous habits, not occasional behaviors. Habits, patterns that repeat regardless of circumstance, tendencies that don't respond to accommodation because accommodation was never the point. Understanding these patterns before they finish their work provides the only protection available. The habits are specific. The damage is predictable. The recognition early enough to matter is what most men fail to achieve. She's always overwhelmed, always struggling, always burdened by circumstances that somehow never improve regardless of how much help arrives. The job is impossible. The family is demanding. The world is unfair. The stress is constant. And none of it ever traces back to her own choices. At first, this looks like someone going through difficulty. You want to help. You provide support, resources, time, energy. You solve problems she presents. You clear obstacles from her path. You do what partners do for people they care about who seem to be struggling. But notice what happens after you help. The gratitude is brief or absent. The relief doesn't last. A new problem materializes immediately to replace the one you solved. The sense of crisis persists regardless of how many crises you've resolved. The helping never produces the improvement that helping should produce. The pattern reveals itself over time. She describes situations where she's perpetually wronged. Coworkers mistreat her, friends disappoint her, family members fail her, previous partners abused her. Every story positions her as innocent sufferer of others' malice. No narrative includes her contribution to negative outcomes. When you gently suggest she might have some role in repeated problems, that if everyone she encounters treats her badly, perhaps something in her approach contributes, the response is immediate and intense. You're attacking her. You're siding with her enemies. You don't understand what she's been through. The suggestion itself becomes evidence that you too are failing her. The accountability never arrives. Mistakes get externalized. Failures get attributed to circumstances. Poor choices get reframed as responses to impossible situations. The internal examination that would produce growth simply doesn't occur because the framework she operates from doesn't permit it. The danger to you materializes in 2 forms. First, you become the dumping ground for endless negativity. Her problems become your problems to solve, even though your solutions don't resolve anything. Your energy drains into a void that consumes without ever filling. The relationship transforms from partnership into unpaid therapy that produces no therapeutic benefit. Second, you eventually become the villain in her narrative. No matter what you provide, the providing will be insufficient. When she runs out of external enemies to blame, you become available as target. The same pattern she applies to everyone else. The victim stance, the externalized blame, the refusal of accountability, will eventually target you. The man who stays long enough becomes the ex she describes to future partners as abusive, neglectful, or insufficient. He joins the catalog of people who wronged her. The years he spent trying to help become evidence of his failure in her retelling. The narrative she needs requires villains. Eventually, every partner becomes one. The counter-habit is clear. Identify women who own their mistakes, who describe past failures with honest self-assessment, who respond to problems by examining what they control rather than cataloging what's unfair. Accountability isn't absence of complaint. It's presence of self-examination alongside the complaint. The woman who never examines herself will eventually find you responsible for everything she refuses to, music, take responsibility for. Habit 2. Manufactured conflict, music, as control mechanism. The argument comes from nowhere. Everything seemed fine. Then suddenly it's not fine. She's upset about something you didn't know was a problem. Something you said incorrectly. Something you failed to do that was apparently expected. Something from weeks ago that's suddenly relevant now. The trigger seems disproportionate to the response. A small oversight produces major reaction. A forgotten detail generates extended, music, conflict. The mismatch between cause and effect signals that the stated cause isn't the actual cause. Something else is operating beneath the surface. What's operating is control. Conflict makes you uncomfortable. Most men dislike prolonged relationship tension. The discomfort motivates you to restore peace. You'll accommodate to end the fighting. You'll concede, music, to stop the cold shoulder. You'll agree to terms you wouldn't accept if you weren't exhausted by the warfare. She's discovered this. Maybe not consciously. Maybe it's learned behavior absorbed from watching others. But the discovery is operationalized. When she wants something and direct request might be denied. Conflict becomes the acquisition mechanism. The pattern has identifiable features. The conflict arrives when she wants something. Your time, your money, your compliance with some preference. The conflict intensifies until you provide what she wants. The conflict resolves once provision occurs. The cycle repeats whenever new wants arise. The escalation adds pressure. If ignoring minor conflict doesn't produce results, she escalates. Silence, tears, threats, mentions of leaving. Each escalation increases the discomfort you're experiencing. Each increase in discomfort makes concession more attractive. The escalation ladder exists specifically to break resistance that lower rungs, music, didn't break. The damage to you accumulates in ways that aren't immediately visible. You develop hypervigilance, constantly monitoring her mood for signs of impending conflict. You develop avoidance, preemptively conceding to prevent conflicts before they start. You develop anxiety, living in perpetual anticipation of the next explosion. Worse, your decision-making gets compromised. Choices that should be evaluated rationally get made under emotional duress. Financial decisions happen when you're desperate to end a fight. Career decisions get shaped by needing to accommodate her latest demand. You stop making choices based on what's wise and start making them based on what will stop the pain. Men have lost houses this way. Signed documents they shouldn't have signed. Make commitments they shouldn't have made. All under pressure generated through manufactured conflict. The extraction looks legal. The consent was technically given. But the conditions under which the consent occurred were engineered specifically to make refusal unbearable. The counter-habit. Refuse to negotiate under conflict pressure. Establish that important decisions happen only in calm conditions. When conflict emerges around a decision she wants, recognize the pattern and decline to engage until emotional atmosphere permits actual thinking. The woman who can't accept decisions made calmly, who requires conflict to get what she wants, has revealed that her wants won't survive your rational evaluation. Habit 3. Emotional withdrawal is ransom. Something shifted. The warmth that used to characterize her presence has cooled. The affection that was automatic now requires effort you can't seem to produce. She's physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. The conversations are shorter. The touches are fewer. The connection that defined the relationship has quietly disappeared. You ask what's wrong. Nothing's wrong. You ask if she's upset. She's not upset. You ask if you've done something. You haven't done anything. Every question produces denial. Yet, the withdrawal continues. The contradiction between her words and her behavior creates confusion that compounds your anxiety. The withdrawal serves multiple possible purposes. Sometimes she's testing, checking whether you'll notice her absence, measuring whether you'll pursue her, evaluating your investment through your response to music or retreat. The withdrawal is examination that she won't acknowledge as examination because acknowledging it would defeat its purpose. Sometimes she's punishing. You did something she disliked but won't name. The withdrawal is consequence delivered silently. You're supposed to review your behavior, identify the offense, and correct it without her having to articulate what actually happened. The silence is punishment and puzzle simultaneously. Sometimes she's preparing. The withdrawal represents emotional departure that precedes physical departure. She's disconnecting because something else or someone else has captured the investment she's removing from you. The relationship is ending in her mind while it continues in yours. The danger is identical regardless of which purpose operates. You're left without information necessary to respond appropriately. If she's testing, you don't know what correct response looks like. If she's punishing, you don't know what offense to address. If she's preparing to leave, you don't know that leaving is imminent. The guessing game damages you steadily. You become obsessed with reading signals that aren't meant to be read clearly. You develop theories about what you've done wrong. You modify your behavior based on those theories, even though the theories might be entirely incorrect. You're adjusting to feedback that was never actually given. The dynamic puts her in control and you in reactive pursuit. She sets the emotional temperature. You scramble to adjust to it. She determines when connection returns. You wait anxiously for it. The relationship's terms are dictated by whoever is willing to withhold what the other person needs. She's demonstrated willingness. You've demonstrated need. Meanwhile, if she's preparing departure, the withdrawal provides perfect cover. She can develop alternatives while you remain committed. She can explore options while you're still invested. By the time departure occurs, she's prepared and you're blindsided. The transition cost you everything while costing her nothing because she managed the transition timeline without your knowledge. The counter habit. Refuse to accept denial when behavior contradicts words. Name what you observe. If she withdraws and denies withdrawing, state that you observe withdrawal regardless of her denial. If she won't discuss what's happening, recognize that the refusal itself is information. A partner invested in the relationship addresses problems. A partner managing departure avoids addressing them. Her response to your concern reveals which category applies. The relationship operates smoothly when you're providing. When trips happen, when gifts appear, when lifestyle maintains the level she's become accustomed to. Under these conditions, affection flows, appreciation appears, the partnership feels genuine, then provision decreases, job loss, financial setback, even just temporary reduction in spending. The affection shifts in response. Not music immediately. The response has delay that provides cover. But the correlation appears over time. More provision, more warmth, less provision, less warmth. The relationship's temperature tracks your output. The timing reveals what's valued. If she loved you specifically, reduction in resources would produce support during difficulty. She'd recognize that circumstances don't define you. She'd maintain connection through the challenging period. The relationship would demonstrate its independence from material conditions. Instead, the relationship demonstrates its dependence on material conditions. Your value to her rises and falls with your resource provision. You're not loved as a person. You're valued as a source. When the source flows abundantly, you receive the affection that keeps the source flowing. When the source diminishes, so does everything, music, else. The danger is both immediate and cumulative. Immediately, you're in a transaction you didn't explicitly agree to. You thought you were building partnership. You're actually funding rental of affection that terminates when payment decreases. The relationship operates on terms you didn't negotiate and probably wouldn't have accepted if they'd been stated, music, clearly. Cumulatively, you're training yourself to buy love. The experience reinforces the belief that your lovability depends on your provision. You develop anxiety about financial performance because financial performance determines relationship survival. Your self-worth becomes contingent on your output. You're one setback away from losing everything that depends on maintaining it. The pattern often intensifies over time. Initial expectations were modest, but expectations inflate. What was enough becomes insufficient. The provision that secured affection last year doesn't secure equivalent affection this year. You're running on a treadmill that accelerates while the runner exhausts. The end state is predictable. Either you can't maintain the required provision level and she leaves for someone who can, or you can maintain it but at cost to everything else. Your health, your relationships with others, your own interests. Either outcome serves her at your expense. The counter habit. Test the relationship under resource scarcity conditions before commitment deepens. Don't artificially create hardship, but notice how she responds when natural setbacks occur. The woman who maintains warmth through difficulty reveals something. The woman whose affection correlates perfectly with provision reveals something else. Know what you're dealing with before the dealing becomes inescapable. Her friend's husband just got promoted. Her sister's boyfriend bought a house. Her co-worker's partner took her to Italy. The mentions seem casual, just conversation, just sharing what's happening in her social circle. Nothing directly critical of you. But notice the pattern. The mentions consistently highlight where other men exceed you. The comparisons always run in one direction. The conversation topics always position you as less than, less successful, less generous, less attentive, less whatever she's currently emphasizing. The effect accumulates beneath awareness. You start measuring yourself against these other men. You start feeling inadequate relative to standards you didn't set. You start trying to match performance benchmarks defined by people you've never met whose actual circumstances you know nothing about. The comparison operates as pressure disguised as observation. She's not telling you to earn more. She's just mentioning that other men earn more. She's not telling you to buy her things. She's just noting what other women receive. The plausible deniability covers the manipulation. If you accuse her of comparing, she's just sharing what's happening in her life. You're being sensitive, but you're not being sensitive. You're detecting something real. The comparison serves purpose. It keeps you striving. It keeps you feeling insufficient. It keeps you working to prove yourself against phantom competitors. The anxiety it produces motivates behavior she wants without her having to request it directly. The deeper damage is to your self-concept. The man who's perpetually compared unfavorably develops perpetual inadequacy. He no longer evaluates himself by his own standards. He evaluates himself by standards, music, defined by whoever's doing the comparing. His sense of his own worth becomes externally determined rather than internally generated. This makes him controllable. The man with stable self-regard can't be pressured easily. He knows his value independent of anyone's assessment. But the man whose self-regard depends on her assessment can be pushed endlessly. Just compare him to someone who's doing more. His anxiety spikes. His compliance increases. The cycle that serves her continues. The comparison also functions as implicit threat. Other men are available. Other men are doing better. The subtext is clear. She has options. You're replaceable. If you don't perform adequately, replacement is possible. The reminder of your replaceability keeps you performing rather than relaxing into security. The relationship should provide the counter habit. Refuse the frame. Her friends' husbands are not your competition. Her sister's boyfriend's purchases are not your benchmark. You evaluate yourself by your own values, your own goals, your own assessment of what constitutes enough. The woman who can't appreciate what you are, who requires constant unfavorable comparison to what you're not, has revealed that no achievement will satisfy her. The comparison will continue regardless of what you accomplish because the comparison serves her interests more than any accomplishment could. These 5 habits share a common music architecture. None of them destroys immediately. All of them destroy gradually. The damage accumulates through repetition until the accumulated damage exceeds what the man can recover from. The gradualism is what makes the habits dangerous. A single, music, instance of any of these patterns could be dismissed. She was having a bad day. She didn't mean it that way. It was just that one time. The excuse seems reasonable when applied to individual events. But patterns aren't individual events. Patterns are tendencies that repeat. The repetition, music, is the signal. One instance of manufactured conflict might be stress. Monthly manufactured conflict is strategy. One comparison to another man might be thoughtless. Constant comparison is systematic undermining. The man identifying these patterns faces difficult recognition. He's invested time. He's built history. He's possibly built life structures. Music, shared housing, shared finances, possibly children that make extraction expensive. The recognition that the pattern exists comes packaged with awareness that responding to the recognition costs enormously. This is why many men ignore the patterns. The recognition would require action. The action would require disruption. The disruption would produce pain. Ignoring is cheaper in the short term. So ignoring happens. The patterns continue. The damage continues. The short-term savings convert to long-term devastation. The illusion that sustains the ignoring is that things will improve. She'll change. The relationship will stabilize. The problems are temporary. The habits are just phases. But habits are precisely not phases. Habits are stable patterns that persist because they serve someone's interests. Her habits serve her interests. They won't change because change would mean serving her interests less effectively. The hope that she'll change is the hope that she'll voluntarily adopt patterns that benefit her less. Why would she? Recognition creates responsibility. Once you see the pattern clearly, you own what happens next. You can't claim ignorance anymore. You can't describe yourself as victim of circumstances you didn't understand. You understand. What you do with that understanding defines you. The options are limited but real. You can confront. Name the patterns directly. Describe what you observe. State what you require for the relationship to continue. See whether confrontation produces acknowledgement and change. Genuine change, not temporary modification that reverts once attention fades. Confrontation sometimes works. The woman who doesn't realize what her habits communicate might respond to clear articulation. The woman who does realize and does it anyway will resist, deny, and attack. The response to confrontation reveals which category applies. Music, both outcomes provide clarity you didn't have before. You can establish boundaries. Refuse to engage under conflict pressure. Refuse to accept withdrawal without explanation. Refuse to fund conditional affection. Refuse to compete with phantom comparisons. The boundaries test whether the relationship can operate on different terms or whether the current terms are all she'll accept. Boundaries sometimes restructure relationships. The woman who is getting away with patterns because you tolerated them might adjust when tolerance ends. The woman whose patterns are non-negotiable will resist adjustment and escalate pressure. Again, the response provides information you need. You can leave. Recognize that the patterns are embedded deeply enough that no confrontation or boundary will alter them. Accept the extraction cost, whatever it is, as price of freedom from ongoing damage. Choose short-term pain over long-term destruction. Leaving is sometimes the only viable option. The woman whose patterns are character or logical expressions of who she fundamentally is rather than behaviors she can modify won't change regardless of what you do. Staying with someone who won't change means accepting the damage their patterns produce indefinitely. The man who avoids catastrophe identifies patterns before commitment deepens. The habits appear early. They're part of her operating system, not reactions to specific relationship conditions. But they appear in subtle form that requires attention to detect. Watch how she describes past relationships. If every ex was terrible and she bears no responsibility for failures, expect to become the next terrible ex. If conflict arose constantly and she was always the wrong party. Music, expect conflict and expect to become the wronger. Watch how she handles your setbacks. If minor difficulties produce withdrawal or criticism rather than support, major difficulties will produce abandonment. The response to small challenges predicts response to large ones. Watch how she responds to boundaries. If early limits produce disproportionate reaction, escalation, punishment, manipulation, the reaction reveals what to expect when larger limits become necessary. The woman who respects boundaries early will respect them later. The woman who attacks them early will attack them forever. Watch how she discusses other men. If comparison is constant, music, and always unfavorable to you, the comparison habit is installed and operational. It won't diminish with time. It will intensify as the relationship develops. Watch for accountability. Does she ever admit mistakes? Does she ever acknowledge her contribution to problems? Does she ever examine herself rather than cataloging others' failures? The presence or absence of self-examination predicts everything that follows. This analysis necessarily focuses on dangerous patterns. The focus might suggest that all relationships contain these dangers. They don't. Some women operate without these habits. Some partnerships function without systematic erosion of one partner by another. If you have a partner who owns her mistakes, who addresses problems directly rather than through manufactured conflict, who maintains warmth through difficulty, who appreciates without requiring constant provision, who builds you up rather than comparing you down, recognize what you have. The relationship without these patterns is rare enough to warrant recognition. The woman who doesn't play these games deserves acknowledgement for not playing them. The partnership that functions as actual partnership, mutual support, mutual accountability, mutual building, that partnership is valuable precisely because the alternatives are so common. Men in healthy relationships sometimes don't appreciate them because they lack comparison. They haven't experienced the systematic destruction that clarifies how good their situation is. Clarity arrives when they watch friends go through what they've avoided. The watching produces gratitude that should have been present already. Ultimately, responsibility lands on you. She has her habits. Her habits serve her. She probably won't change them voluntarily. All of this exists outside your control. What exists inside your control is your response. What you tolerate, what you accept, what you normalize, what you excuse, what you allow to continue, what you address, what you refuse, what you leave. The man who stays in a destructive pattern while understanding it's destructive has made a choice. The choice might be rational. Extraction costs might genuinely exceed continuation costs in his calculation. The choice might be avoidant. Facing reality might feel worse than enduring it. But it's a choice either way. The agency that remains even in constrained circumstances is the agency to recognize what's happening and decide accordingly. Not deciding is also deciding. Passivity is also action. The default that seems like non-choice is a choice to continue whatever is occurring. This responsibility isn't burden, it's power. The recognition that you choose how to respond to her patterns means you're not merely her victim. You're an agent whose choices shape outcomes. The victimhood that learned helplessness produces. The sense that you're trapped without options dissolves when you acknowledge that staying is chosen and leaving is available. 5 habits that destroy men. Chronic victimhood that externalizes all blame. Manufactured conflict that extracts through pressure. Emotional withdrawal that controls through deprivation. Conditional affection that purchases compliance. Systematic comparison that undermines confidence. Each habit builds on the others. The victimhood justifies the conflict. The conflict produces the music withdrawal. The withdrawal conditions you for transactional acceptance. The comparison keeps you performing to avoid replacement. The system interlocks. The woman who displays one habit probably displays others. The habits don't exist in isolation. They're expressions of an underlying orientation toward relationships. Relationships as extraction opportunities rather than partnership opportunities. The orientation produces whichever habits serve extraction in particular circumstances. Your defense begins with seeing clearly. Seeing the pattern, naming it accurately, refusing explanations that obscure what's operating. The visibility is the starting point. Everything else requires seeing what you're dealing with first. Your defense continues with action. Confrontation, boundaries, departure. The specific action, music, depends on circumstance. But action is required. The man who sees and doesn't act has gained nothing from his seeing. Clear vision without responsive action is just informed suffering. Your defense consolidates with standards. Knowing what you won't accept. Knowing what habits disqualify someone from your serious consideration. Knowing what patterns you'll recognize immediately and respond to immediately. The standards prevent future exposure even if they can't undo past exposure. The habits exist. They're operating constantly in relationships all around you. Perhaps in yours. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether you see them and what you do once you do. For those who have experienced these patterns, share what you recognize. Share what you wish you'd seen earlier. Share what finally made you act. The collective experience of men who've navigated this terrain or failed to navigate it helps those currently walking it. The habits destroy because they're invisible until they finished their work. Visibility is the intervention. See them now before the work completes. The seeing is available. Whether you use it determines whether the habits destroy you or whether you escape them. So, what are your thoughts on today's topic? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel Psychological Depth so you won't miss any of our upcoming posts. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.